Hey, this is Victor Antonio, and welcome to another episode of the Victor Report. Today we're going to do a quick book review on something I think you should read. Now, the people that should read this are people who are doing business-to-business deals, salespeople who are selling business-to-business. If you're doing business-to-consumer, in other words, you're selling directly to a consumer, this may not pertain, but the reading is great if you're curious. This is the book. The Challenger Customer. This is a follow-up 4 years later to the Challenger Sale, the book. Now, if you didn't read the Challenger Sale, you missed out. It's a great book. I think you should go read it. Even though it's 4 years old, it's a fantastic book. That looked at selling from the selling perspective, where the Challenger Customer looks at it from the customer perspective. What's fascinating about the book that I really enjoyed, first of all, the reason I love this organization, the CEB organization, is that they do a lot of what I call empirical studies, testing. They do a lot of surveys, a lot of studies, analyze the data, do some regression tests, all those wonderful things that we hate about statistics, to come up with conclusions that we currently don't have. In other words, it's not anecdotal, these are not stories. This is data on what's currently happening in the field. And the reason I enjoy the Challenger Customer is that it talks about how the market has changed. Now, let me just give you the highlights here because I think this is important. Many of us compete if you're selling business to business, and typically when we compete with a lot of competitors, the marketplace has become very competitive. We're typically down to maybe the last three, right? We make the final cut with the last three. They call this the 1 in 3 problem. In other words, you've gone through the specifications, you've met the specifications, you've put in your bid, and you are now down to the final three. You've made the short list. At this point, we start competing on little things, but really devaluing what we're actually offering, and we wind up getting deals that we don't want. The Challenger Sale says that's the first problem. The second problem is that the number, this is key, the number of decision makers now involved in signing off on a deal has increased. This was the big aha moment for me. I knew this intuitively already, but the book confirmed what I believed. And that is that, let's rewind the tape. If you go back to, let's say, 1980, even 1990s and early 2000s, when things were going well, the dot-com, everything was moving, grooving, everything was good. You can find one decision maker to make one decision to buy or not buy. But today, post-crash 2007 through 2009, the economy has tightened up. Money has tightened up. And because of that, people are afraid to make hard decisions. So what's happening now are two things. Is that the number of people required to make a decision is increasing. In the book, they talk about how on average, 5.4 people are now involved in a decision-making process. The problem? Well, if you're talking to one person, one-on-one, you and I, then I can probably close a deal 80% of the time. But when 5 or 6 people get involved, all of a sudden my probability of closing that deal falls to 30, maybe even 35%. In other words, it drops dramatically by half. So the more people involved, the more, as they put it, the more stakeholder dysfunction you'll have. Now, this is important. Stakeholder dysfunction. In other words, if on average, their number is 5.4 people on average now sign off on a deal. 5.4, let's just say 5. You get 5 people in the room, 5 people with different agendas. The question is, how do you get them to collaborate? Each of them has their own agenda, each wants their own say, each wants their own thing in the deal. So again, they're not really meeting in the middle to try to close the deal, so the deal tends to fall apart. In other words, think of a dinner. 5 people, and we all have to agree on what to order. You're going to have 5 different people with 5 different tastes, with 5 different opinions, with 5 different past experiences. In other words, it's going to be very hard. What the book talks about is, how do we overcome that? If now we have to deal with more stakeholders, more decision makers, how do we do that? And here in the book, they talked about how to craft commercial insight. And it walks you through what I call a very flowchart-like process so you can determine what you need to say to get everybody on board. The approach is really simple but yet complex. Simple in its idea, complex in its implementation. What the book suggests is that you find out what these 5 people, what are their priorities, what are their goals, and then find where they overlap, and that's where you begin. Where the overlap starts is where you begin. And from there you expand on that to bring everybody into a collaborative consensus to make the right decision. That's what the best of the best salespeople are doing. That's how the market has changed. We've gone from one-to-one, one-on-one, single person making a decision to one-to-many. In other words, 1 to 5.4 in this case. And because we now have to talk to different people, we now have to find a way to get them to collaborate and reach a consensus. And that's what this book is about. I highly recommend it. If you're in B2B sales, this is a must read. This is Victor Antonio with another episode of the Victor Report, reminding you, selling ain't hard when you know how. Take care.
Every manager can feel it. The difference between a motivated, value-driven sales team and one that's stuck in a rut. CEOs know the difference too. They can see it clearly in the profit and loss columns. The question is, how do you get your team to this elite level? Is there something extra you can do to break through the remaining resistance and equip them with the right mindset to grow your business? Yes, there is. But you're not going to do it with one of those cheesy inspirational speakers or some self-proclaimed guru. What you need is someone with a real business track record to deliver key insights in a captivating way, to give your team the right tools for selling in today's tough marketplace. Enter Victor Antonio, experienced executive, innovative thinker, compelling speaker. He's ready to deliver the message you need your people to hear, not with a canned speech, but a customized, dynamic keynote designed to deliver results. Bring Victor Antonio to your next event before the competition does. Go to www.victorantonio.com for more information.